I'm sure you've experienced this. You have somebody come into coaching, but you get the feeling they don't really want to be there. That it doesn't seem to have been their choice. They're playing along, right? They're playing the game, but they're not really committing. They're not really exploring, and that happens all the time, especially when you coach in organizations or in any kind of 3 or 4 party system. Could be coaching a young person where the parents are the sponsor, and the young person might have agreed to it, but might have not really made the decision to come there, right? Or a leader who doesn't really feel like they need coaching, but they're there because they don't want to say no to it. I'm supervising a few coaches in Asia, and I noticed that there's a culture, particularly my Japanese clients said, well, nobody would say no if the CEO or somebody higher up in the organizational hierarchy suggests that coaching could be good for you, and they're going to play the game, right? And then it's so tempting as a coach to step in and lead and guide the way. And I always get so excited when I hear these stories, because so often I like to have, maybe I like the challenge, I don't know, but I like the situation where you're in there and I realize this person, it's not really their own decision. I love the challenge of how can we make this yours, right? Because I don't need to be here. You don't really need to be here. You chose to be here. So while we're both here, how can we make the best out of it? And offering that kind of choice to them is a really powerful thing, right? But it needs to be picked up, and you need to be bold and somewhat courageous enough to confront a client with what your experience of them is in the space. Because they might also get quite defensive because you kind of call them out on them playing a game, right? So it's a really sensitive situation because you are making some assumptions, but you do have some experiences that are real, right? And the point I'm wanting to make here is that it's just such an important part of coaching, and particularly existential coaching, that you get that kind of commitment, that kind of buy-in, the ownership of the client of this process. If you're working harder than your client, it's probably not going to be very good coaching, right? If you're more committed to this process than your client is, there's an imbalance, right? When you manage to spark the client's commitment and ownership of this process, then you're really, really going somewhere. They're really going somewhere, and you can then facilitate and be their fellow companion on this, whatever journey they chose this to be. Right? But it's crucial. That's why in existential coaching particularly, we start with responsibility and we end with responsibility. Right? When you think about a coaching session, you agree on who takes responsibility for what in the contracting stage in the beginning. And you tend to end sessions in coaching with how are you going to move forward? Who are you going to be accountable to? Right? How do you take responsibility for your process? Because that's one of the issues I run into in supervision a lot. A coach coming back and saying, oh, nothing happened between sessions. The client didn't seem to have done anything, and they come to the next session and then you just pick it up from there. It's not very satisfying. What's missing is that the client really takes ownership of their process and realize that the coaching, most of what happens in the coaching, most of the results happen between sessions, not within a single coaching session. So to have the client commit to that and own it is one of the most important things that you can do in coaching.